Go ahead and call the meeting to order. If we have members take their seats. Once again, we are doing a hybrid hearing, so I will read a fun-filled little statement here that explains how that hybrid hearing is going to work and what the rules are. Members who are joining remotely must be visible on screen for the purposes of identity verification, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceeding, and voting. Those members must continue to use the software platform's video function while in attendance unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member experiences technical difficulties, they should contact the committee staff for assistance. Video of members' participation will be broadcast in the room and via the television, internet/internet feeds. Members participating remotely must seek recognition verbally, and they are asked to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Members who are participating remotely are reminded to keep the software platform's video function on the entire time they attend the proceeding. Members may leave and rejoin the proceeding. If members depart for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join a different proceeding, they should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin if they return. Members may use the software platform's chat feature to communicate with staff regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, I have designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceeding. Thank you. And again, I want to thank our staff for pulling all of this together. Now, members, it's been a complicated and difficult year, but we've made it work. So I appreciate the cooperation and a bipartisan way on the staff to make sure that we continue to do our job within the limitations that the pandemic has placed us. And today we have our first posture hearing of 2021, so our first hybrid posture hearing. And we are focused on the Indo-Pacific region this morning, and we have three witnesses. Mr. David Helvey, who is the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Affairs with DoD, Admiral Philip Davidson, United States Navy, who is the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and General Robert Abrams, who is joining us at, what is it, like 1 o'clock in the morning there, General?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is. 01:03 to be precise.
You look like it's like the middle of the afternoon, just all ready to go. So we thank you for joining us and for your flexibility. I understand you're engaged in exercises on the Korean Peninsula right now that are important for you to be there. So thank you for making the time. I do also want to note that in all likelihood, this is the last time that General Abrams and Admiral Davidson will appear before our committee. And I want to very, very sincerely thank both of you for your leadership, certainly for your service to our country, the outstanding jobs you have done, but also for your relationship with this committee. Both of you have really gone out of your way to be accessible. To make sure that we are kept informed of what you're doing, to answer our questions and work with us. You are two great examples for this country and for the United States military, so I thank you very much for your service and look forward to our opportunity to talk with you today. As mentioned, we are here to do our posture hearing for the Indo-Pacific Command and the Indo-Pacific region. This is an incredibly important part of the world, as China is, without question, the largest national security challenge and competitor that we have in the world today. And I think it's not an overstatement to say that, how the next 50 years goes for this globe is going to be significantly impacted by how we manage that relationship with China, how we meet the challenges that they present in many areas, but certainly in the Indo-Pacific region. And I really welcome the opportunity to have a conversation with our witnesses today who are so expert on that subject. There is no doubt that the problem with China has grown in the last decade. They are looking to export an ideology, an authoritarian ideology, and they are also looking to diminish our influence in the world. There are a number of different challenges here, but overwhelmingly, I just want to make it clear, I think it is incredibly important that the United States stay present in the Indo-Pacific region so that we can be there to work with our partners and allies to make sure that a rules-based system holds sway in that region and that China is not able to crush it and take a hegemonic approach instead. Central to this, in my view, are the partnerships that we have in the region. Certainly, we can have influence, but the stronger nations like India and Japan and South Korea and Thailand and the Philippines and others are, the stronger our partnership is, the more we can continue to enforce that rule of law and make sure that there's a fair balance of power in the region. It is enormously important that we do that. Now, as we move forward, I also want to make sure that we don't stumble into a Cold War with China. And, I'll be interested to hear more from our witnesses on how to do this. But I want us to be strong enough to deter China. The idea that we can build a military large enough and strong enough to dominate China in the modern world is not realistic and is fraught with danger. So I hope we can better understand how to make the proper investments. And that's one big point. I was very pleased to work in a bipartisan way in last session to create the Indo-Pacific Defense Initiative. That's incredibly important to build partnerships going forward, and I know that it is going to have to be funded. But I want to make sure that we are making wise investments in that. We have far more demands for DoD money than we have money. So we're going to have to make some tough choices to figure out what's the best way to spend it, what's the wisest way to live to live with that. As some of you might have heard, I drew an analogy to the NFL salary cap recently. Basically, you got to put together a team, you got to meet all these different responsibilities, but you got one cap on how much money you can spend. And if you spend it all in one area, then the other area will be too weak to accomplish your overall objective. So I'm trying to strike that balance. And obviously, the other big challenge in the region is North Korea. Definitely look forward to hearing from General Abrams about that challenge, what he thinks our best approach is going forward. I just want to close again by emphasizing I think the most important thing we can do in the region is build partnerships and build partner capacities. There are a lot of countries in that part of the world that are sympathetic to where we're coming from, that want to work with us. We need to take advantage of that. Build those partnerships as strong as they possibly can be, and build the capacity of those partners. With that, I will yield to Mr. Rogers for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the Chinese Communist Party rolled out a new set of defense policies. It included a 7% increase in defense spending and a plan to become an Arctic and Antarctic power. The CCP also reiterated their expectation that the world will soon be doing business on its terms. Our allies in the Indo-Pacific share America's commitment to freedom and democratic government. Like us, they are at risk of being overrun by China's push for global supremacy. Effective American military strength in the Indo-Pacific is essential to the security of our allies, global trade, and democracy. That means we need to build a modern, credible, conventional deterrent to ongoing Chinese territorial expansion. And it means that we need a modernized nuclear triad to deter broader conflict. This is not about domination, it's about deterrent. We must make any attack on Americans or our allies too costly for the Chinese Communist Party to consider. Section 1251 of this year's NDAA required Admiral Davidson to complete an independent assessment of what Indo-Pacom needs to build a meaningful deterrent in the region. He reported back that we need to make investments in integrated air and missile defenses, long-range precision fires, and logistical capabilities that can survive in a contested battlefield. Capabilities like the Guam Defense System using Aegis Ashore and TACMOR in Palau will provide our forces with critical information about coming targets. Long-range precision fires backed by more robust IRS capabilities will create openings for our forces to move in a contested environment. I don't think these capabilities are nice-to-haves. I believe they are a bare minimum of what we need to protect our forces and deter China's territorial ambitions. This committee created the Pacific Defense Initiative in a bipartisan fashion to get honest military advice from experts like Admiral Davidson. We would be foolish to seek out his advice and then toss it aside. I look forward to hearing from Admiral Davidson today about these important priorities. General Abrams faces similar challenges. Allied forces under his command have been the backbone of deterrence on the Korean Peninsula for decades. But we need to continue to improve our capabilities in the region to maintain that deterrence. Even under extreme sanctions, North Korea continues to modernize its military, developing larger and more advanced missiles to threaten South Korea, Japan, and even the U.S. mainland. We cannot afford to let that go unchecked. I'm interested to hear from General Abrams' thoughts on North Korea's newly publicized capabilities as well as South Korea's ongoing defense modernization. I also want to know whether the new special measures agreement announced this weekend will improve our ability to deter North Korea's aggression. To effectively deter the threat posed by China, North Korea, and other adversaries, we must fill existing readiness gaps while at the same time modernizing our forces. But that comes at a price, and it's not going to be cheap. The Bipartisan National Defense Strategy Commission recommended annual growth of 3 to 5% above inflation in defense top line. Our defense leaders and experts inside and outside the Pentagon have affirmed that level of investment. I understand that some are opposed to spending what's needed. They'd like to see the money invested elsewhere, but I believe that now is not the time to cut or even freeze defense spending. Doing so delays the development and delivery of critical new capabilities our military leaders need to maintain deterrence, protect our allies, and defend our nation. After we hear about the threats we face from our witnesses today and other combatant commanders that will come before us soon, I hope that we can agree that we must keep investing in defense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now yield back.
Thank you. Before turning it over to our witnesses, I do want to recognize Matt Rhodes, who is our staff lead for this hearing today. It's his last day on our committee, and Matt has done incredible service. Mentioned all the time what a terrific staff we have. Matt is one of those examples, so thank you very much for your service, and sorry to see you go, but you're going to a better place, as they say. So we're sure you'll do well. Thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Helvey for his opening statement.
Well, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on the Department's efforts in the Indo-Pacific region. I'd like to express my appreciation for the continued support from Congress, and this committee in particular, in shaping and resourcing our strategy in this critical region. I'm also pleased to be here, joined by Admiral Davidson, Commander of United States Indo-Pacific Command, and virtually by General Abrams, Commander of United States Forces Korea, the Combined Forces Command, and the United Nations Command. As a Pacific nation, the future of the United States is inextricably linked to that of the Indo-Pacific region. From the earliest days of our nation, our leaders and diplomats have been committed to preserving a free and Indo-Pacific region that would remain free and open for all. As our department's priority theater, we're committed to upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific region where all nations, large and small, are secure in their sovereignty, can pursue economic opportunity, and resolve disputes without coercion, and can exercise the freedoms of navigation and overflight consistent with an open and stable international order. It's an order that places all nations on a level playing field and holds them responsible for preserving the principles that have benefited all of us. Today, this framework is being challenged. The People's Republic of China seeks to use all elements of its national power to reshape the world order into one that's consistent with its authoritarian model and its national goals. Likewise, North Korea's continued pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs constitutes an extraordinary threat to the United States and our allies and partners in the region. Pyongyang's proliferation of weapons and advanced technology is a threat to international peace and security, and it undermines the global non-proliferation regime. And we continue to see within the Indo-Pacific region a variety of transnational threats, including terrorism, illicit arms, drug and human trafficking, piracy, and natural disasters, including infectious disease. The Department regularly works to address these threats alongside our allies and partners throughout the region to prepare for, and when the time comes, which it certainly will, respond to quickly and effectively. To advance our vision, the Department has been implementing an Indo-Pacific strategy which comprises 3 principal lines of effort. The first is preparedness, bolstering our ability to compete across all domains and, if necessary, to fight and win a conflict with a near-peer competitor. Second, partnerships, reinvigorating our alliances and partnerships by increasing our interoperability and leveraging our combined resources for a common goal. And third, promoting a networked region, promoting an interconnected network of allies and partners that can serve as a force multiplier to advance our shared interests. These lines of effort are the baseline for our efforts in the Indo-Pacific and guide our relationships in defense cooperation with allies and partners, translating them into concrete actions that are advancing a shared vision for the region. The Department is strongly committed to fielding robust military capabilities that leave no doubt to allies, to partners, or our adversaries of our ability to deter and respond to aggression. Secretary Austin has stated clearly that China is our highest priority and the pacing challenge for the Department, and he's directed us to review our activities and ensure their alignment with our strategic priorities. Mr. Chairman, I thank you again for inviting me to appear today, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. Admiral Davidson.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the Indo-Pacific region. And thank you, Chairman Smith, for your very kind remarks. Today, I am joined by Indo-Pacific Command Senior Enlisted Advisor, Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, a Special Forces warrior with decades of experience in the Indo-Pacific, operating and training alongside our most critical allies and partners. I can report that Indo-Pacific Command is laser-focused on the Secretary of Defense's immediate 5 priorities, beginning with the initiative centered on the health and well-being of our people. Indeed, investing in our most critical and resilient resource, our people, is a national security imperative. For the past 12 months, we have worked to support the protection and sustainment of our joint force readiness while mitigating the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, our team has worked extensively with local, state, and national leadership to help defeat the disease and minimize the impact on our ability to perform our missions. We also remain deeply focused on cultivating a safe environment for our DoD professionals to learn, thrive, execute their mission, and fulfill their oath to the Constitution. In doing so, we must work and continue to work to eliminate sexual assault, sexual harassment, racism, and extremism, all of which have no place within our ranks. Such abhorrent behaviors are inconsistent with our values and the principles we are sworn to defend. Our greatest military strength is our people. Therefore, operating in an environment free of discrimination, hate, and harassment while accomplishing our mission is paramount to our success. Indeed, it is paramount to ensuring we can accomplish our mission to meet the greatest challenges of the 21st century. The Indo-Pacific is the most consequential region for America's future and remains the United States priority theater. The region itself contains 4 of the 5 priority security challenges identified by the Department of Defense: China, Russia, North Korea, as well as violent extremist organizations. The Indo-Pacific region also experiences frequent natural and man-made disasters, the negative impacts of climate change, rapid population growth, drug and human trafficking, and of course, disease and pandemics. The region accounts for 60% of the world's current gross domestic product and contributes more than 2/3 to the present global economic growth. And in 10 years, the region will host 2/3 of the world's population and 2/3 of the global economy. Our nation's vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific serves as an important reminder to all nations that the U.S. remains committed to free, fair, and reciprocal trade, shared access to global markets, good governance, and human rights and civil liberties. Now let me focus my remaining remarks on the greatest long-term strategic threat in the 21st century, and that is the People's Republic of China. In stark contrast to our free and open vision, the Communist Party of China promotes a closed and authoritarian system through internal oppression as well as external aggression. China's very pernicious approach to the region includes a whole-of-party effort to coerce, corrupt, and co-opt governments, businesses, organizations, and the people of the Indo-Pacific. As China continues to increase the size of the PLA and advance their joint capabilities, the military balance in the Indo-Pacific is becoming more unfavorable for the United States and our allies. And with this imbalance, we are accumulating risk that may embolden China to unilaterally change the status quo before our forces may be able to deliver an effective response. The greatest danger the United States and our allies face in the region is the erosion of conventional deterrence vis-a-vis the People's Republic of China. Absent a convincing deterrent, China will be emboldened to continue to take action to supplant the established rules-based international order and the values represented in our vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Our deterrence posture in the Indo-Pacific must demonstrate the capability, the capacity, and the will to convince Beijing unequivocally that the costs of achieving their objectives by the use of military force are simply too high. Indeed, we must be doing everything possible to deter conflict. Our number one job is to keep the peace. But we absolutely must be prepared to fight and win should competition turn to conflict. I want to thank this committee for your deep commitment to defending U.S. values and interests in the Indo-Pacific through your efforts to establish the groundbreaking Pacific Deterrence Initiative, or the PDI. PDI provides the foundation for establishing a forward-deployed, defense-in-depth posture that defends U.S. homeland and our interests abroad, deters aggression, assures allies and partners, and provides flexible response options should deterrence fail. It is the joint integration you seek in the theater. On behalf of the men and women of United States Indo-Pacific Command, I thank you for your time today, for your continued support, and for your desire to improve the prosperity and security of the Indo-Pacific, indeed, the most critical region on the planet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. General Abrams.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee, I am honored to appear before you today. As the chairman mentioned, we are currently conducting our biannual theater-level combined command post training. Our men and women in uniform alongside our Republic of Korea forces are immersed in a very realistic and challenging training environment. And I am appearing this morning, our time, from an undisclosed wartime command bunker. Chairman Smith, thank you, sir, for approving my request to testify virtually. Your support has allowed me to remain on the Korean Peninsula in order to execute my responsibilities as the commander of United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and U.S. Forces Korea, to lead our combined forces to ensure that we are indeed ready to fight tonight. I also want to recognize the commitment of all the members of Congress to fulfill their constitutional duty on January 6th. The events of that day deeply affected USFK personnel stationed 8,000 miles away from the nation's capital. And as an American citizen, I was proud to see the Congress complete their constitutional duty under some very stressful and dangerous conditions. I'm honored today to represent the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Department of Defense civilians, contractors, and families who all serve here in the Republic of Korea. When I briefed the committee last year, COVID-19 was attempting to test our readiness, and the subsequent impact of the global pandemic exacerbated the challenge across our operational environment. Our alliance, however, rose to the occasion to adapt, innovate, and in the end, strengthen the bond between our two nations. We have greatly benefited from our robust partnership with the Republic of Korea government and the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, KDCA, who have supported our efforts. And as a result, our rate of infection has remained extremely low. Of the 58,000 people who touch USFK bases daily, we've seen a total of 110 local affiliated cases, and of that 110, only 28 service members have tested positive, a remarkable record. Our biggest challenge has been from inbounds or returnees coming from the continental United States, where we've had approximately 700 positive cases. We strictly follow ROC government control measures for reception of every flight, and we follow the ROC quarantine guidance very closely, and as a result, there's been no threat to our personnel or the Korean people. Now I'll provide a quick update on the current situation here on the Korean Peninsula. There remains a palpable reduction in tension that emerged in 2018 after a very dangerous and provocative 2017. Despite the reduction in tension, rest assured that we have not become complacent when it comes to North Korea. We remain clear-eyed about the persistent challenges we face today and in the future. North Korea continues their development of nuclear and advanced missile systems, cyber capability, as well as other conventional and emerging asymmetric military technologies. We will continue to ensure a strong and effective deterrence posture so that Pyongyang never misjudges our role, never misjudges our commitment, and our capability to respond as an alliance. Above all, I'm proud to report that our combined joint force here in Korea is credible and ready to execute our assigned deterrence and warfighting missions. We stand together to deter aggression, maintain the armistice conditions, and ensure the security of the Republic of Korea. Your continued support of our capability enhancements, joint and combined training programs, and theater exercises is critical to our fight tonight readiness posture. The ROC-U.S. alliance remains the linchpin of security and stability in Northeast Asia, and our partnership continues to grow by promoting economic cooperation, mitigating threats to regional stability, and fulfilling our commitments to allies and partners in the region. Every alliance has its challenges, however, and our Ironclad alliance is no exception. One such challenge that confronts us is limited access to training ranges and airspace here in South Korea. If left unsolved, this limitation could affect our force readiness. We are currently working hard with our ROC allies to identify a bilaterally supportable solution so that our forces can train on the peninsula and maintain a credible combat deterrent. The alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States was forged in the crucible of war and shaped over 71 years of combined military operations and training. The shared sacrifice built on trust, respect, commitment, and mutually agreed principles underpins everything that we do here. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, General. Admiral Davidson, we talked a lot about, both Ranking Member Rogers and I spoke about deterrence. You know, how do we deter China and what are we deterring them from doing? I think the most obvious example, obviously, is Taiwan. Nothing would blow the situation up there more than if China took an aggressive move against Taiwan. What do you think is most important for us to do to deter China from taking a step like that?
Well, sir, we've described in our 1251 assessment, which was mandated by law for me to submit to you directly. It articulates the needs principally in five categories. You know, first, an effort to increase our joint force lethality. That includes long-range precision fires, integrated air and missile defense. My number one priority, which is a defensive system at Guam, which is centered on the Aegis Ashore system, but certainly and importantly delivers the network, the command and control for the network that enables it to link to other joint assets on the defensive side and potentially on the offensive side as well. That includes air, maritime, and other ground forces as well. We're also focused on enhancing our design and posture on the region. You've heard a lot of talk about dispersal and hardening of bases and dispersal to places that might be possible in the first and second island chain. There are several proposals along those lines. We're advocating for strengthening our allies and partners. That's principally done through foreign military sales, but it's also done through our exercise program, which, as our allies and partners in the network are bringing aboard important assets with us, like fifth-gen fighters, integrated air and missile defense, and advanced fires themselves. We need to advance our exercise program to make sure that we have the capabilities to exercise, preserve the things that we want to preserve, you know, not reveal to potential adversaries, and move forward. We're also very focused on exercises, experimentation, and innovation. We think that's an important element to bring to our training ranges as well as our joint exercise program. And then lastly, we have several proposals in joint logistics that we think are critical to the sustainment, the provision of munitions, fuel distribution in the theater, and recapitalization of lift assets and our means to command and control them as well.
Thank you. General Abrams, just quickly, you mentioned your response to COVID-19, the pandemic, and thank you. You did an outstanding job of responding to that, protecting our force, and making sure you can continue in the readiness. What would you say is sort of the top-level lessons learned about why your response was successful and what we can learn from that now and going forward?
Chairman, first and foremost, we needed to operationalize our response immediately. There was early on, you know, it was sort of in health channels, and I have the utmost respect for infectious disease doctors and so forth and our health force protection people, but we had to operationalize this. So that was step number one. Step number two was effective communications to inform our force, to inform our entire community on the nature of the threat, and then what should we do about it. And it was constant, clear, concise, transparent communications throughout the entire peninsula led by commanders, our base commanders, garrison commanders, being very aggressive and reducing the anxiety with our people. And then the third thing, Chairman, is an adoption of core tenets. We call it the new normal that everyone's very familiar with. But this was very strange for everyone over a year ago. You know, the simple things, practicing good personal hygiene, washing your hands, wearing a mask, maintaining physical distancing, avoiding large groups. This is in disinfecting our areas, maximizing telework. These are our core tenets. And I'd say those are the three top line messages.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Davidson, in response to the chairman's question, you made reference to your 1251 report and your recommendation for an Aegis Ashore system on Guam. Can you explain in an unclassified manner why that's important and why it needs to be integrated with other systems?
The threat as it's developed in the Western Pacific has moved in a way in which we need to have better integrated air and missile defense capability on Guam in order to defend it. What you have in place right now is THAAD radar, which only has a 120-degree wide look at threats in the region, and in fact, it's oriented on North Korea. And it's meant to defend against a rogue shot of intermediate range from North Korea. We supplement that with an Aegis destroyer. As we look at the expanse of Chinese weapon systems and their employment of air and maritime forces in the region, we need a 360-degree defense now of Guam. And it must be able to meet the ballistic missile threat that can come from PRC land as well as PRC ships. But it also should meet the 360-degree threat around Guam that comes from circumnavigations of Guam by PRC naval assets, including submarines that could shoot land attack cruise missiles, for example, as well as bomber approaches and its ability to shoot land attack cruise missiles as well. We have to be able to defend against all those threats. Aegis Ashore is a proven technology that you have today at sea, and you have it ashore in Romania and Poland to help in the defense of Europe. That system would enable all the capabilities that you have today and begin to meet the threats in the future. As China develops hypersonic weapons during the course of this decade, clearly there's going to be a need to have space sensing associated with that. You're still going to have an interceptor to meet the threat. In my view, that's going to, you rectify that by bridging Aegis Ashore with our space capability that is to come.
Great. How does fielding a long-range precision fire enable mobility with a state like China in conflict?
You know, much of our long-range precision fires come from our air and maritime assets today. That's it. That enables any adversary to focus their means of sensing and ability to target our assets on only a portion of the joint force. If we had a wider base of long-range precision fires, it forces the Chinese intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance apparatus to work much, much harder, locating all those nodes, and then in all the ways that ground, air, and maritime forces can hide. Manipulation of the electromagnetic spectrum, speed, concealment, all those things, we can then use those to enhance the maneuver of the force. And, you know, for those with military experience, you know that maneuver and fires work hand in hand, and they are key to the overall set of needs that we have to employ at the operational level to be successful.
Right. In your professional military judgment, if we build out the capabilities you've described in your report along with the other investments we've got in the region, would that in fact have a deterrent effect on Chinese aggression?
We call the brief in large, regain the advantage. We think those are the key elements of joint integration that are required to bring by what I'm very encouraged by all the individual service doctrines, but it's got to come together in a joint approach. And this is the methodology to do that, and it's meant to deter.
Okay. General Abrams, the South Korean government has committed to increasing their defense spending and buying a lot of their own hardware. Is that hardware going to be interoperable with our systems?
Congressman, interoperability is at the very core of our ROC U.S. military alliance, and it's been that way for decades. So it's part of our DNA. And to answer your question specifically, yes, these key capabilities, as they come online, even the indigenously produced, we have a shared commitment from both nations to ensure that we maintain interoperability.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Langevin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning, particularly you, General, going above and beyond the call, being available at such a late hour. But thank you. Let me start on a technology question. The USS Portland will deploy in your area of operations with a 150 kilowatt laser next year, and the Navy is in the process of integrating its new Helios laser system with Aegis. Admiral Davidson, how do you envision incorporating these weapon systems into your operational concepts, rules of engagement, and tactical employment considerations?
Directed energy weapons, Congressman, I think are the way of the future. In my view, the capability that Portland is bringing, and then in the future, our ability to marry that directed energy with the Aegis weapon system is really going to help us in our terminal defenses, which are so critically important, because we're going to find over time that our need to defend while a network of sensors is going to be extremely important going forward to project long-range fires, whether those are offensive or defensive fires. We are going to have to layer in some defensive weapon capabilities, and this is where I think directed energy is going to make its entree into the joint force. Very encouraged by it.
Thank you, Admiral. The one thing I'm technologies as we develop new technologies like directed energy. Can you still hear me? Okay.
You're kind of breaking up a little bit. Take another shot at it.
Okay. So I was saying that I'm concerned as we develop new technologies like directed energy, high-level planners won't understand their capabilities and will fail to take advantage of their true potential. So Admiral Davidson, how are you working to improve your staff and subordinate commanders' understanding of these new technologies and how they'll be utilized?
Yeah, sir, one of the things we did at Indo-Pacific Command was to, create a process for planning and operations collaboration that pulled on the very narrow set of people that have the highest classifications that address the highest technologies that we're bringing into force, to make sure that our future plans are developed in a way that understand those high classification, high technology priorities. I think that process addressment has been extraordinarily helpful in the headquarters as we've worked to work on our, the assignments I get to do contingency planning itself. And I think it's going to be the wave of the future. At the end of the day, we're going to have to have more people understand these technologies at the appropriate classification level in order to introduce these properly into our planning and ops.
I agree with that. I'm glad you're planning well for the future. Let me ask one other question to you, Admiral Davidson. When looking at emerging technologies that our peer adversaries are developing, Admiral, what do you believe is the most dangerous technology or capability that's been deployed in your AOR, and what do you think will be the most dangerous in the future?
Well, sir, my obligations, have to span a number of potential adversaries as well as a number of threat systems. I'd be hard-pressed to identify one that I can't, I must account for them all somewhat in the current environment. As we think about the future, the creation and the fielding of hypersonic weapons, the potential ranges that those might affect and influence much wider and wider areas of the globe, I think are really going to challenge our needs to develop like offensive capability as well as defensive systems against those.
Very good. Thank you, Admiral. I see my time's winding down, so I'll just thank you all for your service and for your testimony here today. I look forward to our continued work together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here today. And in particular, Admiral Davidson, I want to thank you for your recognition of Guam, how strategically located that is, and how the citizens there are such patriotic Americans and so proud to serve. They have the highest percentage of membership of the military of any state or territory of the United States. So we have a real asset there that we want to work with. So thank you for your identification of that. Additionally, Secretary Helvey, recently I introduced the Foreign Influence Transparency Act to limit foreign interference within our universities, many that conduct defense research. We know that the People's Republic of China integrates information operations into its defense posture by way of Confucius Institutes. These are extensions of the Chinese government that Human Rights Watch says censors on political grounds and expects loyalty from its employees. Has DoD assessed the risk posed by China's information operations efforts at our universities and the implications for defense research? How can we further assist DoD to confront China's influence in U.S. academia?
Well, Mr. Wilson, thank you for that question. And you're right, we are very concerned about the potential for what could be called non-traditional types of intelligence operations in the United States, and one of which would be the use of students, sometimes witting or not, at our universities and research centers. So part of what we've tried to do as a department is, one, to understand the nature of that challenge and threat, and two, work with our partners across the interagency, including domestic law enforcement, and to help educate over the nature of that challenge, to help educate folks that how China uses some of these tools and instruments to conduct its influence operations, or conduct its intelligence operations. And so part of it has been kind of documenting this and working to make sure that that information is provided so that folks can make their own decisions on whether or not they want to participate and how they want to interact. I think the second thing that we've been able to do is working again with our partners across the interagency to work to tighten the controls, whether it's export controls or licensing, so that as we identify entities that could be concerned, the entities of concern, entities that have an affiliation with the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, that we can provide that information to allow folks to be able to make due diligence decisions on how they engage with them. So, for example, we started to publish the list of entities associated with the so-called the 1237 report, which goes back to a piece of legislation that Congress passed to identify Chinese military companies and affiliated companies. The Department of Defense has a responsibility to produce that. We are producing that, and that serves, we think, as an important tool to help our partners in the interagency, but also private citizens and entities to be able to make decisions on how they want to engage with these organizations and outfits.
Well, thank you for being proactive, and I'm really grateful that the University of South Carolina, led by General President Bob Caslin, former superintendent of West Point, they have taken the effort to remove the Confucius Institutes, and so we need other colleges and universities to show equal courage. Additionally, General Abrams, I'm encouraged by the agreement in principle between the United States and South Korea, and that is with the agreement as a meaningful deterrent to malign actors, as well as a symbol of our continued peace through strength with our courageous Korean allies. Given the changing security environment presented by an emboldened China, what are the steps being taken for a joint strategy against the DPRK?
Congressman, as you're well aware, so it's really on two levels. The first level, on the military side, all of our planning to deal with any sort of contingency here on the Korean Peninsula. That is governed by an alliance decision-making process. Alliance produce strategic planning guidance and a strategic planning directive that drives all of our operational planning, and that is at the center of our military alliance operations. On a broader scale, in terms of the strategy, I would defer to Mr. Helvey, but this is all part and parcel of the North Korea policy review that was directed by President Biden. That review is ongoing, and as you probably are aware, they're firmly committed to ensuring that there's proper and adequate consultation and close coordination with the right government.
For interrupting, General. The gentleman's time has expired. We got a lot of people to get to, so I got to get on to the next member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Larson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Admiral Davidson, welcome, and up here. Can you discuss in brief how U.S. Indo-Pacom will utilize and reposition SOCOM forces as part of the PDI? It's an issue of the use of SOCOM in the great power competition sphere. I wonder if you had some comments on how you envision that.
I'll leave some of the specifics to the classified hearing, sir, but broadly, Special Operations Forces, Special Operation Command in support of our efforts, their traditional missions are in building partner capacity, building relationships with other nations in peacetime in a non-kinetic environment. There is a lot of opportunity to do that across the whole of the Indo-Pacific region. I've been quite pleased with the way SOCPAC has adapted in the region, providing small elements of teams to help build those partnerships with other nations. But I'll talk to some of the specifics in the classified hearing.
Great, thank you. Mr. Helvey, welcome back as well. Many of the nations that were both listed in your, talked about in your testimony, listed in Admiral Davidson's testimony, are great supporters of the United States. However, there is a feeling in that region, and I think Prime Minister Lee of Singapore mentioned this at the last Shangri-La dialogue that we could go to. He maybe didn't say it this way, but the theme was, don't make us choose. And so I'm wondering how the Department of Defense is managing that feeling in the region about, don't make us choose between the U.S. and China, although from testimony it looks like they've chosen. But how do you manage that attitude among some of the countries that we'd like to see more support out of?
Well, thank you, Mr. Larson. And first and foremost, you're right to point out our allies and our partners are a critical asset to the United States, and it creates an advantage that we have that our adversaries cannot hope to match. And we have taken on board and understand concerns from the region. We've heard it very clearly. Don't make us choose. That's been a consistent refrain. And the reality is that we're not asking nations to choose between the United States or China. In fact, we welcome and encourage all nations across the Indo-Pacific to maintain peaceful, productive relations with all of their neighbors, China included. Framing the strategic competition that we find ourselves in with China as a choice between us or China, or as a choice between nations, is really a false choice. The choice that our allies and our partners and everyone in the region faces is between supporting the existing international order, the existing system that's free and open. It's the system that we helped to create and that we've supported and that we believe has benefited everybody in the region, including China. And the alternative now that China is presenting, which is a closed system and a more authoritarian governance model. So it's a competition between systems, and it's a choice between systems. Do you want to choose a free and open system, or do you want to choose a closed and authoritarian one? And so we're only asking countries to do their part to uphold the international laws, rules, and norms which support their interests, which they've benefited from, and that help to provide for security and prosperity for all of us. And so that's the ask that we've got of our allies and our partners.
All right, thanks. I'll probably have more, and I would note. I will also note the Chinese government makes it really easy for some countries as well to choose a free and open world order. General Abrams, the last time I was in Korea, which is about seems like 4 million years ago, we talked about training exercises. And I think my question to you was, if things didn't go well with the negotiations between the United States and North Korea, would we re-up reinvigorate the training exercises? Can you tell us where things sit with that, between the U.S., FK, and ROC forces?
And sadly, you have 12 seconds to answer that question. That's what members do.
You're interfering with my time, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, sir.
Congressman, I'll provide your office an appropriate response that is necessary. But I'll go back to my opening comments. We have a trained and ready force, and our training has continued.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Abrams, I appreciated the opportunity to be able to talk to you last week. I understand that when we're talking about the issue of the impact of COVID, there's a great deal of concern as to how our foreign-based personnel and their families are receiving the vaccination. This was undertaken as a federal program, warp speed, and certainly protecting our service members should be of an incredible high priority. I understand you have about 65,000 service members, families, civilians, contractors, and retirees. They don't have the ability to go off base as you do in the United States. If you're in another state that has a program, you could go and participate in that program. So they're reliant on your ability to deliver the vaccine. There's a 75% take rate in vaccination. And could you please tell us about the availability of the vaccine, what you're receiving? Excuse me, guys. Hey, guys. Could you please tell us about the number of vaccines you're receiving, how few they are, and how your increased need? And they've muted you. I think it's the deep state.
Okay.
There we go.
Congressman, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks for the question. And since you and I last spoke, I'm happy to report that we recently received unforecasted 9,700 doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which will go a long way towards being able to give the immunizations to our beneficiaries. But to your broader point, we're following the Department of Defense schema. And as you stated, my concern is that, for our large, portion of our healthy military force, but it's really our non-military beneficiaries. So we have retirees, we have family members, et cetera, who are affiliated as part of that 65,000. I am concerned about the continued availability. We've got a great push right now, but we've got some concerns going forward to ensure that our family members and others have the access to the vaccine commensurate with their stateside counterparts.
Certainly, and also, as we all know, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not as effective as the others, so we're sort of downgrading. Mr. Chairman, I'd love to join with you on an inquiry on the issue of what is our plans for our foreign-based personnel, because it does sound that we are shorting them. General Abrams, as you're aware, we had land-based tactical nuclear weapons on the North Korea peninsula in South Korea for over decades. George Herbert Walker Bush pulled them out in 1991. We think, certainly that's a great illustration of rebutting the philosophy of if we denuclearize, others won't pursue nuclear weapons, because now you're facing a nuclear North Korea. They're moving to solid propellants, greater accuracy, intercontinental ballistic missiles that will affect the United States, and of course sub-based. What do you need, and what is your assessment of the missile defense priorities as you look to what you're facing from North Korea?
Congressman, we have a very robust combined capability between the ROC and the U.S. Air and Missile Defense Forces. And we've been the beneficiary of congressional support of a joint urgency operational needs statement from a couple of years ago. MDA is in the process of fielding 3 specific capabilities. One's already here. The other 2 will come on board this year that will significantly enhance our ballistic missile defense.
Admiral Davidson, the F-35. Tell us how critical it is to your overall planning and defense, and as you look at what the capabilities of our adversaries in the area may be or that they're developing, what the F-35's role would be.
Thank you very much, Congressman. The 5th-gen fighters, the F-35 and the F-22, are critical to any future warfight we might have in the theater. Our adversaries are developing or are fielding already 5th-gen fighters themselves. And we know from our own gaming and emulations that 5th-gen fighters are actually a game changer in the warfight. To go backwards into 4th-generation capability as a substitute broadly would be a mistake in my view. And would actually put us at a severe disadvantage over the course of this decade.
And again, I must
when it comes to
apologize, Admiral, for interrupting. The gentleman's time.
Thank you, Admiral.
Has expired, and Mr. Cooper is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because I'm going to ask my questions in the classified session, I would like to yield my time now to Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you to the witnesses, and again, General Abrams and Admiral Davidson, thank you for your great tours of duty at a critical time. Admiral Davidson, on page 35 of your testimony, you set forth China's sort of brazen, repeated violations of the Law of the Sea Treaty, and mentioned the fact that 80 South China Sea geographic features were renamed with, I guess, Chinese names. Can you flesh that out a little bit, what that means in terms of, maritime territorial claims and the impact in terms of freedom of navigation?
Well, the Chinese are trying to basically impose Chinese national law on the international regime that provides for the freedom of navigation and freedom of the seas. We've spoken quite a bit about the Chinese use of lawfare. This is, one of the methodologies in which they do it. It's not just the naming or renaming of features that have had longstanding names in the region. It's the redefinition of what they might be, because, rocks, islets, islands all have very specific navigational rights associated with them, as well as their continued militarization of the features that they built out early in the last decade. Their continued militarization is to, frankly, deter not only the United States, but truly cow all of our allies and partners in the region, and certainly the South China Sea claimants, from their absolute rights to operate and those rights that they enjoy for economic resource extraction, freedom of the seas, freedom of the airways, et cetera.
Well, thank you for that answer, because again, as you point out, this isn't just about sort of names, it's also about sort of territorial claims and what that means to the rules-based system that has been so successful over the last 75 years. Your predecessor, Admiral Harris, back in 2015, when he was asked about whether or not the U.S. should participate as a full ratified country in terms of UNCLOS, was pretty forthright in terms of saying that, and I'm quoting, "I think that in the 21st century, our moral standing is affected by the fact that we're not a signatory to UNCLOS." Can you state what, in your military opinion, is in terms of whether we should become a full signatory, and whether you agree with Admiral Harris's statement?
Yes, sir, I agree. I'm on the record at my confirmation hearing that I think being a signatory is important, and I haven't changed my mind at all.
Well, thank you for that answer, because, again, the Sea Power Subcommittee is working with the Foreign Affairs Committee to try and do a joint hearing to really elevate this issue. Back when Admiral Harris was testifying, that was when the Philippines had the claim against China, which, as you know, the Hague ruled, unanimously in favor of the Philippines. The U.S. tried to even get observer status in that proceeding. They obviously couldn't get party status as not a signatory. But again, we were denied observer status and had to rely on Australia to kind of be our legal aid lawyer to sort of represent our interests. So, it's really, way past time for us to become a full participant. Also on page 32 of your testimony, you noted the fact that in 2020, China commissioned 25 major warships, which is kind of a stunning factoid in terms of the middle of a pandemic, that they were able to churn out those. I would just remind my colleagues, just about a year ago, we got a budget from the prior administration which cut shipbuilding by 18%. It was 7 ships in the budget, according to the Congressional Research Service, 2 of which were tugboats. Again, we did yeoman's work in this committee to backfill those cuts, and I want to publicly thank you, Admiral Davidson, for speaking out about the fact that we could not lose a submarine if we wanted to really, again, have an effective deterrence in that region. And, again, it's that type of leadership which I think really helps the Congress, who has the constitutional duty to provide and maintain a Navy, to at least try and, have some semblance of deterrence in that region of the world. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lambert is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Helvey, I have a couple questions for you. China wants to be considered a major player on the international stage, but it keeps engaging in irresponsible behavior. Some of these examples are violating territorial waters of other nations in the South China Sea, theft of intellectual property, genocide of the Uyghur people, their social credit system, environmental pollution, lack of donations to international relief efforts, and on and on and on. And one other area of irresponsibility is that they have not entered into any arms control agreements. And this is while they are modernizing their nuclear weapons and they're increasing the number of their nuclear weapons, but there's no transparency. And I know many people have said they need to be part of an international arms control protocol. What is the Biden administration doing to bring them into arms control negotiations?
Well, thank you, sir, for that question. And you're right. China has been pursuing a robust, strategic forces modernization, and the transparency into it is truly lacking. Yeah, there has been efforts over the years to try to encourage China to participate in some type of arms control discussion. This was something that was undertaken under the previous administration under Marshall Billingsley to try to work with China to bring them into the discussion that we have with the Russians. The Chinese to date have refused. In terms of how the current administration is going to approach it, that's something that's being looked at as part of a broader-based China strategy and policy review. That's going to have to kind of play out before the president's able to make determinations on how it wants to address China in this particular aspect.
Okay, well, I want to hear, and I think we all want to hear how that comes along. I wish you were farther along, but I guess we'll have to just wait and see how this evolves. But there's got to be a plan and it may not work, but there at least should be a plan to push them in that direction. And then I'd like to ask you about India. I think we all agree that it needs to be a better partner and a counterweight to China. So what is the Biden administration plan to build a stronger partnership with India, both economically and militarily?
Well, sir, what I'll try to do is stay within the defense lane. And you're right to point out India is a real partner, a rising partner of the United States. We have a unique designation with India. It's called a major defense partner. One of the things that we're prioritizing is looking at ways to operationalize this defense partnership with India, to be able to look at ways where we can work together in the defense space in pursuit of common interests based on our converging strategic interests. So one of the things we'd like to be able to do is build on some of the foundational agreements that we've been able to conclude with India in recent years, say, for example, with information security or logistics arrangements, to where we could share more information with India so we can build a common strategic understanding of the types of threats that we face together, look at how we can use our forces in Indian forces in the Indian Ocean region and beyond to be able to work together, whether it's in maritime domain awareness or maritime security or humanitarian assistance and disaster response. As you know, the Quad that people talk about has its origins in responding to the 2004 tsunami. So we're looking at ways to where we can work with India and with other like-minded partners to be able to operationalize our cooperation in pursuit of common task. So I think that's one area. Next, another area that we're looking to do is deepen our military technical cooperation with India. That's based on providing them arms and equipment so we can build interoperable forces and capabilities, and work with India as it's developing its own defense industrial base so that India is able to produce equipment to service their needs and to be able to work more with us and others around the region.
Admiral, do you have anything to add to that?
No, sir. I agree with Mr. Helvey. Over the course of my tenure at Indo-Pacom, there has been some opportunity to cooperate in the maritime and to assist a little bit in the information sharing, some cold weather gear and things like that with India's challenges along the line of actual control. I think it's gone a long way to deepening our relationship and really presents a key strategic opportunity, I think, for the United States.
Okay, well, thank you, and I look forward to hearing more specifics. I know it's early in the administration, but I really want to hear some more specifics as we get farther along. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Abrams, thank you for the discussion last week. I'll forego additional questions at this time. Mr. Helvey, your response to Mr. Lamborn was most useful and interesting with regard to India, and I would want to pursue that. My question really goes to Admiral Davidson. You have recently, in response to last year's or the current NDAA, issued a Pacific Deterrence Initiative. I thank you for that piece of work. In previous discussions, we've talked about the tyranny of distance. And I'm concerned that this document does not talk about maritime logistics from the West Coast or anywhere in the continental United States to support the Pacific enterprise. This is something that I would want to take up in a classified hearing. Perhaps that's where it is. I know that Mr. Whitman and Mr. Courtney have expressed concerns about this whole issue of maritime logistics. Specifically on the demand and supply side, the demand for supplies, fuel, I don't see addressed in your document. Could you speak to that and then in a broader sense about how you would propose at this point to deal with the maritime logistics issue, the tyranny of distance?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The 1251 assessment provided to inform the Pacific Deterrence Initiative does have as one of its 5 main pillars joint logistics in it. Our approach to that document is to address the joint integration that must happen. So there's a very heavy logistics focus in it. The services all represent the platforms of their capabilities, and without a doubt, recapitalization of military sea lift is very, very important to our warfighting concept in the Indo-Pacific, as well as the 1251 report. Because the 1251, specifically addresses the need to be able to distribute fuel, munitions, the other, costs of sustainment, so to speak, through a wider, more dispersed set of places, bases, as well as seaborne assets. So it does address what our needs are in the sea lift, and it does it from all the way from the West Coast to the United States and all the way to the point of delivery, what our total joint logistics needs are.
I'll be looking forward to the detail behind that statement and also how we would provide that sea lift. Where is the money for it? Where are the ships for it? What kind of ships and so on and so forth? We've been talking about a national maritime strategy using the Jones Act fleet to support the military in a way that has not been done for 70 years or 75 years. So we'll be looking at those things. Look forward to working with you and your people on this entire maritime strategy, the logistics piece of it. Thank you so very much. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming to join us today. Admiral Davidson, wanted to ask you a question. It's really a dynamic about generating current readiness and the need to make sure we have long-term readiness. As you know, we have the Global Force Management Allocation Plan, which essentially says what do the combatant commands need in the long term. And then there's a request for forces. So if things change operationally, you can request and say, listen, based on a threat, we need more assets in these particular areas. The one thing that does, though, is it creates a challenge for us because we need to understand where is that request for forces. And the process, to be honest with you, is a little opaque. It's hard to understand exactly where that demand comes from. I wanted to ask this. When the COCOM submits a very high volume of requests for forces, without us understanding what's changing the operational environment, that kind of runs counter to the gift map, as it's called. And that does create some questions. So I wanted to know, is that essentially saying the gift map is incorrect? And secondly, do you think that Indo-Pacom has been judicious in its request for forces? And thirdly, if there's this imbalance between the request for forces and the gift map, do you think we need to relook at the process in what goes into generating the information in the gift map, especially since we're generating readiness today, which consumes resources that do also need to be allocated to generating readiness in the future? So I just want to get your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. A very complex process.
Yeah.
I understand that exactly. Basically, a request for forces is to address an urgent or current need. The gift map, as it's developed, actually is developed beginning about 2 years in advance of the fiscal year going forward. Mm-hmm. Whenever an RFF is submitted from whatever combatant commander might submit it around the world, the process actually brings together all the people that might be affected. That certainly includes the service chiefs, whose focus is on both current readiness and long-term readiness, and it certainly brings in the affected combatant commanders as well. So we at least get an opportunity to comment on what we believe the risks are. I could tell you my own addressing of these issues has an eye on both the long-term and current risk. You know, actually formerly being a fleet commander, I know what some of these effects are going forward. And I would say that Indo-Pacom's approach throughout this process has been very judicious.
Very good. Thanks, Admiral. Wanted to, again, go back to the idea of short-term readiness versus long-term readiness. And as you know, last year, the Lincoln returned after 283 days at sea. We just saw the USS Nimitz return after 321 days at sea. That's the longest deployment since Vietnam. We're sending out the USS Eisenhower. She's going to be double pumped, so we're continuing to really stress the assets that we have today to generate readiness that we have before us. And again, it looks at the dichotomy between the request for forces and the gift map and determining if we have a lot of requests for forces, where does that really leave us in what we're trying to do in the long term? And that is, how do we balance those risks, long term versus short term? First of all, I want to ask, do you believe it's important to have an aircraft carrier presence in Indo-Pacom? And do you believe that they have the ability to deter conflict within the region and what that perspective is from your standpoint? And in your best professional military judgment, do you believe that, considering the current stress on the aircraft carrier force, that taking out an aircraft carrier from service just before its midlife refueling would be a smart thing to do?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, carrier presence, forward deployed, is one of our main mechanisms of deterrence and certainly provides a high level of assurance to our allies and partners in the region that the United States considers the Indo-Pacific not only a priority, but it's number one priority going forward. There is no capability that we have that can substitute for an aircraft carrier, in my view. You can see by the strain of deployments over the course of the last year, that they are in high demand by all the combatant commanders. And sustaining that capability going forward, in my view, is critically important. I'm in full support of the law, which calls for the number of carriers in the United States. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your service. Admiral Davidson, where does cybersecurity fit into your proposal for expanding the Pacific Deterrence Initiative? If you receive your additional 90 billets, will any of them be devoted to cyber issues?
Yeah, a little less than a little more than a quarter, a little less than a third are actually committed to cybersecurity issues. Of course, cybersecurity support for the combatant commanders. There's a supporting relationship with Cybercom, and of course, all the services as well, have some responsibilities to help provide for cybersecurity. So a portion of that 90 is actually committed to that.
Thank you. I understand that in your report you asked for a number of investments to strengthen military capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. I noticed that your request did not include mention of the littoral combat ship or the Constellation-class frigate. Do these ships have any use in our efforts to confront China in the Indo-Pacific, or are they draining resources away from more useful and effective equipment?
No, they have absolute utility, ma'am. The focus of the 1251 report was really on the joint, the capabilities that are needed to bring the joint force together there effectively to deter, as well as, if we were called upon to fight and win in conflict. I can't possibly write a report that would accommodate for every platform and every capability desire across all the services. That said, I am in full support of what the services have advocated for, both in their vision for doctrinal evolution of their individual service visions, and I'm in close coordination with those service chiefs to make sure that our warfighting concepts out there adapt to those visions.
So you're endorsing the littoral combat ship? We're now calling a frigate because it isn't really a combat ship?
We had great success with the Gabriel Giffords deployment during the course of 2019 and 2020. There will be more LCSs deploying to the Indo-Pacific during the course of this calendar year, and it's been very, very important to us for engagement, especially across Southeast Asia, and it does have a warfighting.
All right. I am aware of serious maintenance problems, especially, I believe, with the Freedom class. So I will leave that there. Let me ask you one final question. I saw in your written testimony that you've conducted surveys on sexual harassment and sexual assault and have used the results to improve prevention and response programs. Would you tell us more about what you learned from those climate surveys?
Yeah, one of the things that was important, and this is specific to my headquarters alone, was because of the joint nature of Indo-Pacific Command and the large service presence, we didn't have direct representatives on the staff to manage the program for sexual assault, as well as to do EO, equal opportunity, and equal opportunity employment functions. If anybody had an issue on the staff, they were required to actually go to the service component headquarters where there was representation to address those issues. Certainly to smooth communications, get more accountability in it at the leadership level in the headquarters. I took out of hide people that had the training to do those functions, established them in the headquarters, and it's improved my ability to share best practices and receive best practices across the island of Oahu, as well as assure my force that we're properly paying attention to this. I'm not quite sure whether all combatant commands have that issue, but I would say that
I guess I'm more interested, excuse me for interrupting, in what the climate surveys showed you.
We had a rating of excellent. 93% of the people on the staff said that our approach to program management with sexual assault was positive and gave it an excellent rating.
All right. Finally, in 34 seconds, there is in Hawaii a serious problem with childcare. and you are anticipating new positions. Have you contemplated how the child care component of that is going to be considered?
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you citing that. There is high demand for child care in Hawaii broadly. What's going on right now is they're conducting they're having a virtual hiring fair. The DoD has also addressed this by
and again,
improving
I
use of licensed
must apologize.
sites and other things. I'd be happy to talk to you more.
I thank
about
the chairman. I yield.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Stefanik. I beg your pardon?
I don't think I'm next in line. I think I came late to the hearing.
Okay.
I'll ask a question.
According to my handy-dandy sheet here,
Okay,
you are in fact
great.
next in line. So if you
Great. I
want to
will not yield to others then. I want to talk about some of our cyber capabilities. As you're looking at China continuing to make investments in their cyber capabilities and AI, this has been a priority for the subcommittee that I'm the ranker on. The previous IETC, now it's strictly focused on cyber and technical capabilities. Can you talk about what steps you think we need to take to make sure that we maintain leadership in those technology capabilities and how we can partner more effectively with our allies within PACOM on both the cyber side and AI side?
Specific to my theater alone and my own priorities, ma'am, I've advocated for in the 1251 report a mission partner environment. This is IT technology that's available to us now, which would deepen our collaboration and our ability to share information, do planning, that kind of stuff with the allied and partner network broadly across the region. So I think that's a key way ahead. We do have a system called BICES X right now that we share with a number of partners in the region. That needs to be sustained, in my view, in order to provide this resiliency and security that you talk about going forward. Of course, there's broader needs across the globe, but I'd have to leave that to policy and DoD to address.
Well, ma'am, I understand you will be getting briefings and testimony later from folks from U.S. Cybercom and others that are directly responsible for cyber policy. I would just add that we understand, given the increased investments from other threat actors like China and North Korea, that cyber is an area that we've got to maintain focus, not only in terms of ensuring that we've got hardened and defended networks, but also that we can share information with our allies and partners to help them address their own vulnerabilities. One of the things that's been a consistent theme, both in terms of what I've talked about today and what Admiral Davidson has talked about, as well as General Abrams, is how important being able to share and work closely with our allies and partners around the region are. And to the extent to which that cyber threats affect not only us and our allies and partners, we've got a responsibility to help make sure that we're clean, as well as the folks that are to the left and right of us.
And General Abrams?
Congresswoman, I'm in full agreement with Mr. Helvey and Admiral Davidson, and we are the beneficiary of great support on the cyber side from Army Cyber, which is the Combatant Command Support Agency for us here. But I strongly endorse Mr. Helvey's comments about the importance when it comes to dealing and interacting and interoperability with our ROC counterparts.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. I should have said this at the outset, but as members know, at 2 o'clock, we're going to move over to the CVC for a classified brief. We want to give the witnesses some time in between. So we're going to have a hard stop at 1:15. 1:15, we will pause. If people want to grab a quick lunch, and then we'll reconvene in the CVC auditorium at 2 o'clock for a classified discussion. Mr. Carbajal is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank both Admiral Davidson and General Abrams for including in your testimonies your commitment to address and prevent sexual assault and harassment within your commands. In order to effectively address this, obviously, there must be buy-in at all levels of the leadership. So I appreciate your and the Biden administration's pledge on this very, very important issue. Admiral Davidson, China is exceedingly operating in the gray zone between peaceful relations and overt hostilities. how does your assessment of resourcing requirements for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative meet the challenge that is gray zone warfare in the region?
The fundamental underpinnings of the document, sir, is to approach the region with a deterrence strategy. Deterrence writ large, while we have some new names and things like that for gray zone, it's about our ability to do it day to day in peacetime. So the approach that we've taken is to bring together a set of capabilities in the 5 pillars that I described earlier in a way that helps deter our potential adversaries, and that would include North Korea, as well as assure our allies and partners, all while preparing the strength of what I believe is U.S. Influence in the region, which is our allied and partner network. Get them to assist in many of these things, share in the information that they develop and that we develop, and basically pursue, the idea with the assurance to others that we are there to stay for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. In both your testimonies, Admiral Davidson and Secretary Helvey, you discuss how a changing climate is an increasing security challenge for the region. Can both of you elaborate on how the Department and Indo-Pacom is working with partner nations on addressing climate change, especially when it comes to small island nations who are more at risk?
That principally falls into my responsibility out there in the theater, sir. And to be brief, one of the organizations that reports to Indo-Pacom is called the Center for Excellence for Disaster Management. And it trains not only my military people in the Pacific, but government officials in the United States, local, state, national, non-government organizations, and we've offered this course to partner nations in the region, principally in Oceania, to train both their civilian defense force officials, law enforcement, and how to mitigate the effects of a natural disaster, some of which may be, 500-year storm a couple of years ago in the wake of climate change. That's a very important engagement organization for me, and it has great influence and weight far beyond the resources that we actually put into it. And I think that's, the prime way in which I address this in the region right now.
Thank you. Secretary Helvey, in your testimony, you state that one of the department's most far-reaching objectives is to set the military relationship between the United States and China on a long-term path of transparency and non-aggression. That is a worthy goal. So how are we balancing the desire for non-aggression with long-term strategic competition with China?
Thank you for that question, sir. And you're right to point out in the 2018 National Defense Strategy, it was identified as our farthest reaching goal. The way we accomplish that is basically in 3 pillars. One, obviously, and this is the stuff that Admiral Davidson's talked a lot about this morning, we got to be able to maintain, a credible forward presence and a credible deterrence. Pardon me, a second aspect of it is working very carefully with our allies and partners around the region to ensure that they're able to work with us and with each other in order to preserve and protect their own sovereignty. That helps to augment deterrence and help to maintain a regional and security environment that's peaceful and stable. And then the third part of it would be how we engage with the Chinese themselves, where we're very careful and deliberate, consistent with the statutory limitations in the National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2000. We're looking at ways to ensure that we're maintaining open channels of communication at all levels of the People's Liberation Army, and then prioritizing within those dialogues, tools and mechanisms to ensure risk reduction and confidence building measures. So that as we operate close to each other, if there's an incident, if there's an accident, we have the tools in place so that we can manage it in a way that doesn't, escalate into a confrontation or a conflict. And the last part of it is we want to look for areas where we can cooperate, where we have mutual interest.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Desjardins is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and I'd like to thank our witnesses today for their service. Admiral Davidson, what do you consider the most likely potential target of Chinese aggression or military action in the next 5 to 10 years?
Given what they've said both publicly and over time, and certainly during the during the tenure of Chairman Xi Jinping, I would say Taiwan is the first.
Yeah, I noted on Monday a top Chinese diplomat, State Councilor Wang Yi, warned that there is no room for compromise on Taiwan and that the U.S. government should drop the prior administration's dangerous acts of playing with fire. Also on Monday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said American commitment to Taiwan is rock solid. What have you seen in your 3-year tenure as far as how that relationship's evolved, and where do you think they currently stand?
I'm sorry, whose relationship, sir?
The relationship between China and Taiwan.
I would say that China's passage, basic revocation of a one country, two systems approach in Hong Kong alarmed Taiwan to the extent that during the course of the late 2019 election in Taiwan, that both parties that were running for election were required to say they didn't support a one country, two systems approach with China. So it has steeled, I think, Taiwan's status in the region, and I think all other nations in the region as well have noticed a very pernicious approach that China took to Hong Kong, and that's put a chill on many relationships as well.
Okay. One of the more notable items included in your proposal for PDI was a request for ground-based, highly survivable precision strike fires from greater than 500 kilometers. I don't know whether you think that would have a deterrent impact, but what is our best strategic option to uphold U.S. defense and possibly offensive capabilities in this region?
Well, I think broadening our base of long-range fires across all domains is incredibly important, as is the defense of Guam going forward. And the advantage that the defense of Guam brings us is its capability that's already online. It's not in development. It's actually stuff you've purchased already. It's highly integrable with the joint force on both offensive and defensive fires, which I think is critically important. And it'll be a very, very important command and control node for us in Guam. Guam is key to our approach to the Western Pacific. Not only is it U.S. territory, it's a critical sustainment, munitions, power projection platform, and repair facility for our ships forward.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Sorry.
Up here, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brown, I saw you in the back room. Now you're on screen. It was confusing. Mr. Brown is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for convening this posture hearing, and thanks to our panelists for being here today and for your leadership. Admiral Davidson, I wanted to talk to you about our alliances and partnerships in the region. And beyond sort of coordinating presence, I'd like to know what coordination there is with our allies and partners around force structure, investments in capabilities and capacity. And I ask this because, as was stated by the chairman at the outset of the hearing, and as we all know, the United States simply can't do this alone, and certainly not in isolation, given China's increasing enhanced capabilities and capacity. So I know in Europe, we've got a pretty mature process of coordinating investments and force structure. Can you describe the processes and the commitment to doing that in the Indo-Pacific?
Thanks for that, Congressman. We have a series of bilateral alliances in the Indo-Pacific: Japan, Korea, Australia, Philippines, and Thailand. And we have key partnerships, some of which Mr. Helvey addressed. Of course, India, Singapore, New Zealand, and of course we have other alliances where we have influencing nations in the Indo-Pacific, like the United Kingdom, of course, and Canada, as well as others. Many of these, I can tell you that many of our bilateral allies in the region buy U.S. equipments, even as their status as defense partners or even as lesser partners out there. They seek U.S. equipments. I think it's incredibly important because it generates a level of compatibility and interoperability when we're all operating like equipments. We have a series of dialogues with these individual nations, some of which are run at the policymaking level at OSD. I have bilateral defense dialogues as well. Investments in that regard, what people want and what we collectively bilaterally think are improvements are always discussed in the process.
Thank you. And another question for you, Admiral. There has been some criticism that the training exercise in the Indo-Pacific Command are a little outdated, and they rely a lot on sort of like big fleet, big ship exercises. They're not necessarily joint. They're not reflecting the doctrine or the concepts that you're moving towards the more distributed maritime operations. And they don't necessarily adequately involve our allies and partners in sort of like a multi-force way, a real combined force way. Can you just speak to that criticism, and if it's accurate, what are we doing to sort of course correct?
Yes, sir. It was one of the things I addressed in the 1251 assessment. It's one of our pillars there to advance our exercises, our experimentation, and our innovation, and actually calls for some monies that would stress to higher end threats, not only the U.S. force, but those of our allies and potentially our partners as well. One of the key investments is not only improvements in the joint exercise program that you're talking about, the exercises themselves, but advocacy for a Pacific multi-domain training center, which is really a mobile concept designed to knit together the really extraordinary training ranges we have in the Indo-Pacific, in Alaska, in Hawaii, in Guam, and potentially with our allies in Australia and Japan. We think it's a very cost-effective way to bring multi-domain, which we have to bring cyber, space capability, all these long-range fires, integrated air and missile defense into our exercises in order to present the kind of adversary in a virtual and constructive computerized construct in order to more highly stress the force. I think it's critically important.
Just finally, you may not be able to answer it fully. Each of the services seem to be developing new operating concepts, multi-domain for the Army, littoral operations in a contested environment for the Marines. What are you doing to sort of like synthesize and aggregate those different concepts into a more joint concept?
Very briefly, we've certainly used that to inform, as I mentioned, the joint integration that is the approach in our 1251 assessment. And it's also informed what we're required to do for contingency planning, as well as what we call the Indo-Pacific warfighting concept, which is informing the joint warfighting concept in the Pentagon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Mr. Gallagher is next.
Chairman, there we go. Admiral Davidson, in your statement, you highlight that Indo-Pacom requires highly survivable, precision strike fires featuring increased quantities of ground-based missiles and improved air and long-range naval fires capable of ranges over 500 kilometers. I agree emphatically. Unfortunately, last year, the appropriators zeroed out funding for Marine Corps anti-ship missiles that would have provided exactly this kind of capability. Just so everyone is crystal clear, why operationally do you need this capability so badly?
The require to deter in the near term, given the advances in Chinese capability, I think requires the use of existing capabilities that we have. What the Marine Corps has asked for have already been developed in the Navy and is employed on Navy ships, things like Maritime Strike Tomahawk, SM-6. These are immediate capabilities that I think should be made available to the Marine Corps, yes.
Can you speak how specifically the cut for Marine Corps long-range precision fires last year impacted your command? How would a similar cut this year impact readiness in your command?
Well, we've spoken a lot, a little bit today about our ability to enhance the maneuver of our air and maritime forces. This is what a broadened base of fires actually brings to us. I would say continuing to cut that in hopes for some future capability is not meeting the time needs that we have to address the Chinese threats that are manifest in theater right now, and it undermines our deterrent.
And we've talked a lot relatedly about dispersal today. The Marine Corps' Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations concept is one innovative solution that I believe would supplement our fixed base infrastructure in the region with dispersed teams of Marines contesting strategically important maritime spaces. In your professional judgment, is this kind of dispersed EABO concept feasible without long-range precision fires?
Certainly not as effective.
And to put a point on that, if you want dispersed, mobile, and survivable firepower in the Indo-Pacific, do you need to ensure the Marine Corps and the Army have ground-based anti-ship missiles with ranges over 500 kilometers?
Yes, I agree.
Admiral, finally, in your statement, you wrote, "The greatest danger for the United States is the erosion of conventional deterrence." What role would ground-based anti-ship missiles play in supplementing or strengthening conventional deterrence, and what are the consequences if we unilaterally cede this capability to Beijing?
Yeah, again, I think the expansion of ground-based fires enables the maneuver of our maritime and air forces, because what you get is the require for much more intense search for offensive capability out of any adversary's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance network. We want to make our adversaries work harder to find our stuff and to defend against it. That's what deterrence is about. It's imposing cost.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Helvey, I think you mentioned earlier the FY99 NDAA report, the 1237 report, or someone mentioned it, forgive me. You know, Admiral, thanks in part to your predecessor's help, is strong support. We passed the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act in the last Congress, you know, strengthening CFIUS. What we haven't really addressed is sort of outbound investment to Chinese companies. So, Mr. Helvey, I'd be curious in what little time I have left, do investments in companies on that list complicate your job and make all of our jobs more difficult when it comes to our force posture in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, certainly, I think the one of the principal benefits of the 1237 or 1260H reports is to increase the transparency, and that's why we try to make sure that we've got a rigorous methodology to identify these entities and companies and their connections, and we try to base it on open information to the greatest extent possible, so that it allows private citizens, companies, commercial entities to be able to do due diligence, so they understand where their resources could be going and what they could be contributing to. And quite frankly, given China's strategy of military-civil fusion, having that type of transparency and due diligence helps folks to understand, because yes, you could be contributing to commercial enterprises in China that are building equipment that could ultimately pose threats to the United States or our allies.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Gentleman's time expired. Mr. Kim is recognized for 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Chairman, for bringing us together with this, and thank you all for joining us here today. I wanted to just start with a big picture question here in terms of next steps. Some of my colleagues have raised issues about what next when it comes to actually coalition building in the region. And Admiral Davidson, I wanted to just kind of get from you a sense of what comes next with regards to the Quad. When we've seen these initial discussions that are happening, sort of building out for over the last couple of years, what is the end goal here? What is it that we're actually trying to achieve strategically here that we're trying to get towards?
Yes, sir. Something I think Mr. Helvey should address as well. I think Quad, the potential for a Quad is far more than just a security relationship. I think the whole of the region is looking for assurances from a network of like-minded partners for a free and open Indo-Pacific. I think the visions that have been articulated not only by the Quad but by others in the nation, support that vision going forward. So, as we think about it in the military and diplomacy and economics, information in the military sphere, I think there's great opportunity across the whole of that apparatus.
Yeah, Mr. Helvey, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. And if you don't mind, also just throw on top of that just the dynamics that we're seeing between South Korea and Japan right now. I know that there's some news that perhaps we're going to have some diplomatic discussions and how it is that we can try to strengthen that relationship, because I think many of us would agree that that dynamic is not where we'd like it to be between South Korea and Japan. So how does that lay on top of some of the visions moving forward for the Quad, especially given that South Korea is not part of that type of structure? How do we see this kind of fitting together?
Well, thank you for that question. As I mentioned early on in this hearing, the origins of the Quad actually go back to the Quad being the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. Go back to the multilateral response to the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean region. But beyond that, initial kind of response, we saw that we've got shared values and converging strategic interests, and between the four countries, we've got a pretty strong commitment to upholding a rules-based international order and a free and open, Indo-Pacific. We see the Quad as a venue for coordination and collaboration across our respective governments. This is not something that's uniquely defense and security. In fact, most of the discussion within the Quad has been about diplomacy and economics. And I know this is something that will be discussed on Friday at the leader level, which President Biden is going to be holding a virtual Quad. So what we'd like to be able to see over time is the introduction of operational and practical types of cooperation, not only among the Quad nations, but the Quad nations and other like-minded allies and partners. I think we saw evidence of this last year when we had the Malabar exercise, which was the first time since 2007, which the four parties were able to get together and work at very practical tasks through a maritime exercise. Beyond that, we could see areas for cooperation in things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, cooperation in some of these new domains like space and cyber. A lot of this is stuff that it creates the types of challenges that we all face, but we can't necessarily tackle it alone. And so when you look at it in that context, you see that the Quad becomes part of a broader regional security architecture, which is overlapping, layered sets of capabilities and groupings that have its foundation and core a series of bilateral relationships. Admiral Davidson talked about our treaty relationships. We also have strategic partnerships, or in India's case, a major defense partnership. We've got a number of multilateral venues that we can operate on, which is the Quad inclusive, things related to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, trilateral relationships like between the United States, Japan, and South Korea.
Why don't I just pause there for a second? So one last thing I wanted to ask General Abrams about, just in the final seconds here. There have been discussions about whether or not we should move forward as the United States with a formal end to the Korean War. I know there are political discussions about that in terms of how that should figure into negotiations on a diplomatic angle. But from a military standpoint, is there any problem or any challenges that you want to cite for us in terms of a declaration of that sort?
Congressman, the short answer is I have no immediate military concerns in terms of our mission here in Korea. The bigger point, though, is that that should be considered as part of a broader strategy with a clearly defined end state.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon is recognized.
Thanks to all three of our panelists today. Thanks for your leadership over here. It's always hard to find who's talking with the masks on. But I really appreciate the three of you and what you do for the defense of our country. Admiral Davidson, we've already talked a little bit about the need for surface-to-surface missiles, Navy projection capabilities, and a lot of this is a result because we were a part of the INF treaty, so we couldn't build these capabilities while China could. Now they could target all of our bases in the Pacific. One thing I haven't heard you talk about is the need for long-range strike aviation, stealth capabilities like the B-21. Could you talk about how important that capability is to you for your combat plans?
As I think about the future in the region and the proliferation of offensive fires in the region, as well as, ever-increasing improvements in range, a long-range stealth bomber like the B-21 is going to be incredibly important going forward. I speak quite frequently about what it takes to deter in the region, and our ability to do so means we've got to be able to fight in the clinch as well as to be able to fight from outside the ring, too. And it's the power of those capabilities that has been core to warfighting concepts for the United States going back 100 years now, and I suspect they'll be needed going forward as well.
And I'd point out the B-21 gives you rapid response capability, perhaps your fastest response capability. And one of the concerns, if we're looking at surface-to-surface missiles, which I think are important, what countries do you think would be willing to host these, knowing they're targeting China? Because that's a big part of the question.
Well, certainly, I made mention earlier that I think all nations in the region are somewhat alarmed by China's activities and the very profound changes in the numbers of ballistic missiles that they have in the region. And I would say that many nations out there are considering what their needs are here, but there's certainly going to have to be a policy approach to a number of nations there, and I'd let Mr. Helvey here talk about that.
Sure seems to me we need multiple capabilities to get this done. I want to pivot a little bit to nuclear deterrence. You know, there's been a debate in this body for the last 3 or 4 years on do we modernize the ICBMs? Do we go to a dyad? I think the debate has swung towards the triad and modernizing the ICBMs. But I think it'd be important to have your perspective in regards to China. If we do not modernize our 400 ICBMs and focus on bombers and submarines, what do you think is the impact to strategic deterrence with China?
Certainly the lessons I've learned during the course of my career is that the triad has been critically important to the security of the United States, as we think about the Cold War with the Soviets. As I look towards the great expansion of Chinese capability, I made comment yesterday that they have quadrupled the size of their force over the course of the last 20 years till today. And it's estimated that it will at least double over the next 10 years. That's going to require, going to have to be the basis of our assessment as we think about what our strategic deterrent is going forward.
Strategic deterrence is job number one, I believe, and I think it's so important that we do modernize. My final question, I used to be an electronic warfare officer for most of my career in the Air Force. We had superiority in the electronic magnetic spectrum up through the 90s, and we sort of disinvested and put our money in other places, while China really invested in this area. And I think many folks would say they have superiority in this area and controlling the electronic magnetic spectrum. But we've tried to do some good work on this in the last 4 or 5 years to turn this around. Are you satisfied with the direction of the department when it comes to regaining superiority in the electronic magnetic spectrum? And do you feel satisfied where we're going when it comes to your theater? Thank you.
Yeah, so the effort over the last 5 years has been critically important to restoring this. We went through a relatively finite period here over the previous 2 decades in which we didn't have to worry about challenges to that dominance out there. But as I think about investments going forward writ large, and this goes beyond the electromagnetic spectrum alone, we have to think about contested environments. And one of those things that can contest multiple environments, the maritime, the air, the ground, space, and cyberspace, is the exploitation of electromagnetic kind of fires. So we need to continue to stay after that to preserve and regain, in some cases, the advantages that we enjoy in those other domains.
And that
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired, Ms. Loria. And sorry, I do want to, 1:15, we got to be done. I apologize. We'll get to as many as we can between now and then. Ms. Loria.
Oh, I apologize. It seems is this microphone working? Oh, well, thank you, Admiral Davidson. Nice to see you and have you here again to talk about this very critical area of the world for our national defense. And in your testimony, you talk about providing a convincing deterrent. So a convincing deterrent requires presence within the AOR. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, there's the tyranny of distance. We have our forward deployed naval forces in Japan, but the other forces coming from CONUS take much longer to transit. Can you talk a little bit about the potential growth of other places that our forces could be stationed overseas to provide more continuous presence within the AOR. If there are any particular locations that you are optimistic that we could create basing arrangements with our allies in order to have a more sustained operational presence within the region.
Three of the areas that have been being developed over the course of the last several years have been Northwest Australia, Singapore, and of course Guam. And associated with Guam is the DPRI, the restationing of Marines from Okinawa in partnership with Japan, and Guam is one of the beneficiaries there. Those are three areas in which I think bases need to be continued to flesh out. It may not mean necessarily more people or more capabilities in all places, but certainly the access and some of what we envision in the Indo-Pacific warfighting concept and in the PDI to facilitate, things like sustainment and logistics will be critically important. I can't leave out Diego Garcia as well. Now, we do have ambition in there for what I call places, not bases, not permanent bases that look like housing and the permanent assignment of troops, but places that we might assess. They're well articulated in the classified 1251 report, and perhaps we could talk about some of those countries later.
I also wanted to touch on the recent announcement by the Navy that they would be reestablishing the First Fleet. So as the combatant commander and kind of looking at the naval forces in the AOR, do you find that'd be advantageous from your position to have that split between the 1st and the 7th Fleet? Or do you find that the current operations with the 7th Fleet covering essentially the whole maritime area of your AOR is sufficient?
Admiral Aquilino at Pacific Fleet has been asked by Navy to look at some options for what the First Fleet might do. He's still in the process of developing what the concepts might be, what the impacts, pros and cons are, and how it affects 7th Fleet, some of our relationships out there as well. I look forward to having that conversation with
Okay, certainly can follow up on that. And also talking about presence and the type of ships and aircraft we have in the theater. Recently, the U.S. Coast Guard deployed to the PACOM AOR. And I wonder if you could talk about your perspective on the utility of that type of platform operating, under the control of the Coast Guard and potentially under tactical control of the Navy or yourself at future times. Do you find more utility? Should we have more Coast Guard assets in the region? And is that particular platform something that is very useful under the Coast Guard within your AOR?
We work in close collaboration, with the PAC Area Commander, Vice Admiral Linda Fagan. The Coast Guard has relationships in the region, the same country-to-country relationships that we would have, but in unique portfolios like illegal, unregulated, unreporting fishing, narco trafficking, human trafficking, maritime domain awareness, and they have key relationships with countries, particularly in Oceania, that may only have law enforcement organizations. So their Coast Guard presence in the region is very, very important as when we talked about earlier building partner capacity in our engagements. I'm very grateful for their approach to the region, and they seek to collaborate with us, the Coast Guard does. I'm also very appreciative of the very unique relationships. They have fisheries relationships with Taiwan, even the People's Republic of China, that are important venues to engage and advance interests of mutual interests that we're both concerned with.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. So we got 15 minutes left, and that means we've got Ms. Cheney, Ms. Kahili, and Mr. Waltz. So we will get to those three, and then we will be done and reconvene over at the CVC for the classified brief. Ms. Cheney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I want to start, I want to thank in particular General Abrams for your comments about January 6th. And I think all of us recognize, we were reminded that day of how fragile our systems could be, but also how resilient they are. And the systems held. And I know that in a bipartisan fashion, we all strive every day to make sure that we remember and recognize the sacrifices that have been made to defend our freedom and the sacrifices that those of you in uniform continue to make, and to conduct ourselves in ways that are worthy of your service and your sacrifice. So thank you for your service, and thank you for those comments, and thank you for being here with us today. Admiral Davidson, I wanted to ask you about deterrence. And Chairman Smith has mentioned a couple of times a concern about ensuring that we aren't creating a new Cold War vis-a-vis China. And so I wondered if you could dispel that notion, talk a little bit about exactly what this strategy is. I know you talked about this yesterday over in the Senate in terms of what really is required to ensure that the Chinese military recognizes and understands how painful the first 24, 48, 72 hours would be for them, ensuring that we have sufficient resources and capabilities so that they aren't provoked by our weakness, frankly. But if you could give us a little bit more detail in terms of how you look at that deterrence, and I know some of that will come in the classified portion as well.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and very well articulated. At the heart of our approach in the Indo-Pacific is a deterrence by denial approach. In my mind, that takes a requirement to have the capability forward. That involves both our forward-based forces today, as well as the forces that we rotate routinely in the region. Sufficient warning, ISR, presence of conventional assets, and the ability to project offense, to defend our forces, to defend our obligations in the theater, not only U.S. territory, but our bilateral allies as well. In order for any adversary to peel back the curtain every day and say, I see they have the presence, the capability, in the numbers, the capacity, and the desired training and authorities to actually prevent me from pursuing my objectives, and then close the curtain and say today is not the day. That's the very nature of what we're trying to accomplish. We seek to maintain the peace.
Thank you, and I'll look forward to talking in more detail about that in the classified setting. Could you just say a few words, Admiral Davidson, about operational concepts? I know this is something that the National Defense Strategy focused on a few years ago, but in your view, where are we in terms of having updated and adequate operational concepts with respect to China in particular?
Yes, ma'am. The Joint Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and his staff are working very diligently on a joint warfighting concept and 4 subordinate warfighting concepts, logistics and networking and others that we believe are critically important. We've been running a series of war games to help inform development of those concepts. And as I mentioned earlier, given my requirement to focus on the immediate needs that are present out there in the theater, we are working with the services quite closely as new capabilities come in to be able to pull them into our what we call Indo-Pacific warfighting concept that would be, our approach to the region over the next few years.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I apologize. I made an error. One of the things about people come and go, and when they come back, if they were here ahead of the list, so I apologize to Mr. Kahili. We're not going to be able to get to you. Mr. Keating has returned, and he was here at the start. So Mr. Keating is recognized for 5 minutes, and then Mr. Waltz will wrap us up. Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try and be brief and narrow. Thank the witnesses. What really continues to be a concern is, the reports where we had started out with joint, but the Chinese and Russians, and that's quite a change in their posturing before, actually engaged in joint training exercises. Could you comment on what the outlook is for continuation of that, what your take is on, what threat that could pose and what changes in their relationship could impact us?
Thank you, Congressman. During the course of the last 3 years, we've seen the Chinese participate with the Russians in Russia's capstone Eastern Military District exercises on an annual basis. We've seen some co-bomber flights, side-by-side flights of bombers from the People's Liberation Army in China as well as Russian forces. And we've also seen some naval exercises during the course of my 3 years in command in the Indo-Pacific. I think we'll continue to see exercises and cooperation like that. There are many that say that those exercises are pretty nascent and don't demonstrate the kind of coalition approach that the United States might have with others. Nevertheless, they're learning along the way, and we should be concerned about it.
Great. Well, thank you. And that just speaks to our necessity in moving forward on our own partnerships, like the one you referenced in your Senate testimony with the Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the U.S. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back some time so that everyone gets a chance at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that will give us time to get to Mr. Kahili. So, yeah, coming and going. Mr. Waltz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be sure you can hear me okay.
Yes, we got you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Admiral, Mr. Helvey, General Abrams. Thank you so much for your service over the last few years and for your candor and commitment to the oversight of this committee. I just want to throw out there where I'm starting kind of from, at least from my perspective, I do believe we're in a Cold War with the Chinese Communist Party, or at least they believe that they are in one with us. We need a bit of a wake-up call across our populace to that fact. And just by definition, if we have a competitor that has by many measures, larger economy than ours and is on track to have a larger military and is seeking to displace us diplomatically, economically, and through the information space, that is a Cold War environment, at least by my definition. So, Admiral, I would like your opinion on some analysis that I've been absorbing that points to what the CCP and the PLA define as success. And one of the things that they plan on, at least in their long-range campaign planning, is the United States financially, fiscally, no longer being able to compete. Essentially, the United States, in many ways, declining economically to the point where we can't afford to be a competitor with China, and certainly not in the Pacific and in the Indo-Pacific. Do you agree with that analysis?
Sir, I think one of the key advantages of the United States over the course of the post-World War II history is our ability to lead the world in innovation. That's led not only to prosperity in this nation, but I would say across the globe as well. Investments that focus on innovation, and there's plenty of opportunities there in artificial intelligence and 5G technologies and on and on there, advanced energy production and things like that. There's plenty of opportunity for the United States to continue to lead the globe there. I will say that one of the Chinese talking points and one of their efforts to deter the world and to deter us from our bilateral alliances and multilateral associations is to convince the rest of the world precisely that we're on the decline and they're on the rise. I have to tell you, I'm an optimist about America if we focus on our strengths.
No, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Admiral. And I would just submit that if we don't have our own house in order financially, if we continue to build on a $30 trillion debt, that may imperil our ability to make those investments that you find so critical. And then secondly, if we continue to allow the Chinese Communist Party to steal their way to the top through cyber, through mergers and acquisitions, and through, frankly, just outright theft in our research and academic universities, the conversations that we have in this committee may not matter because we just cannot keep pace. So one of the things that I'd like to get at, from at least in the few minutes I have remaining, is, do you agree that, or what does Beijing fear the most? I mean, do they fear internal unrest, a rearmed Japan, a unified Korean Peninsula, Western U.S. allies on their periphery? I mean, we've talked a lot today about how to defend our basing and to maintain our capabilities, but how do we get inside their decision making as we seek to maintain deterrence?
Thank you, sir, for that. You know, I would say that they're, setting aside fears for a minute, their number one priority is to keep the Communist Party of China in power. They have concerns about their own internal security, what the influences are there, and they have external security concerns, which I think are totally unwarranted, given the West's, support to China over the last nearly 40 years now, specifically, as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield my 10 seconds.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Hey, that's better than average. And last but not least, Mr. Kahile.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Chair. Aloha, Admiral Davidson. It's great to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me just before coming here to Washington, D.C. I'll be quick. I appreciate the testimony, and I couldn't agree more about your analysis of 360-degree missile defense capability protection for Guam. And I hope that whatever system we put in place there to protect our first and second island chains, we one day look at protecting Hawaii as well. As you well know, I represent Hawaii. I commend the Navy for the successful and Indo-Pacom successful FTM-44 test last December off the coast of Kauai, and showing the value of the Pacific Missile Range facility at Barking Sands. And so my question is, in regards to China's increasing threat and their development of their threats, specifically potential ballistic missile threats for Hawaii, is there any thoughts or discussion put into one day looking at SM-3 Block 2A interceptors, either deployed on Aegis ships off of Hawaii or utilizing the VLS Aegis Ashore site at PMRF once we direct our attention towards Guam and then start to look at things like Hawaii?
Thanks for your question, Congressman. My nearest priority there is for the Homeland Defense Radar Hawaii, and it's unfortunate that falls outside the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. But as we think about developing threats, what it might come to, that sensing and awareness, helps improve capability gaps when it comes to maneuvering, decoys, ballistic missiles that might have decoys associated with their reentry vehicles, and then potentially for maneuvering vehicles when they enter the atmosphere as well. I hope everyone in the Congress has noted that the SM-3 2A had a very successful engagement here several months ago from the USS John Finn. Presents certainly a capability option to the nation. It is something that I think should be considered going forward as we see the threats develop.
Great. And my last question then, Admiral, is if that's the case, as a National Guardsman, it's my understanding that NORTHCOM's ground-based missile defense system is manned in combination with the Army National Guard and active component soldiers in Colorado and Alaska and California. The Chief Naval Officer, Admiral Gilday's 2021 navigation plan, in it he states that to remain ahead of our competitors, we will divest ourselves of legacy capabilities that no longer bring sufficient lethality to the fight. This includes divesting non-core Navy missions like Aegis ashore and transferring those shore-based ballistic missile defense sites to ground forces enables sailors to focus on their core missions at sea and frees up resources to increase our lethality. Admiral Davidson, do you ever think that the Aegis ashore system could be possibly manned in Indo-Pacom by the National Guard?
I think certainly there's the potential for that. The Navy has built the training infrastructure, the maintenance pipelines, the supply parts needs, all that other kind of stuff to be able to bridge off of. And I know that the Chief of Naval Operations is in discussion with his service chief counterparts in the Pentagon about what the way ahead might be.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Mahalo.
Thank you all very much. That will conclude our hearing. I want to thank General Abrams for joining us. He will not be joining us, obviously, in the classified session in the CVC. But again, really appreciate your service and your leadership. You've done a fantastic job. Good luck with the rest of the exercise. And thank you again to our other witnesses as well. We will see you in 45 minutes over in the CVC. And with that, we are adjourned. Well, Mr. Rogers, you don't have anything? Okay.
I was just going to tell General Abrams, go get some sleep now.
He's probably going to go back to work. I don't think your microphone was on, so I don't think he heard you. But anyway, Mr. Rogers was urging you to get some sleep if you have the opportunity. But we'll see how that goes. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Where are you off to now?